Hey guys, my name is Anthony and in today's video I'm going to be talking about some things that you need to focus on during your races, whether they're league races or whether they're career mode races, it doesn't really matter. So if you want to see more videos similar to this, make sure to click the link at the top right hand side of the screen and it will take you to a playlist full of F1 2020 tip videos that I've made in the past, from how to drive without assists to what each setting means when creating a setup. So as I've just mentioned, we're going to be looking at some of the things that you need to focus on during your league races or during your career mode races, and these are all things that I tend to focus on during my league races each and every week. So the first thing that you really need to focus on, and this is more true to people who do league races, because with the AI it's a lot easier to overtake them, but it's knowing when to overtake and when to defend. Obviously we race to win, so you're going to want to overtake as many cars as possible if you're not already in the lead. However, there are certain situations where it's better for you to stick behind the car that is ahead of you and just let them drag you along through DRS. And one of those examples are if you and somebody else in front of you are sort of trying to catch up to a pack ahead of you that's maybe 5 or 10 seconds ahead of you, and they're already in a DRS train of themselves. If the guy ahead of you is showcasing that he's got some pretty serious pace around the track, then it's better to just stick behind him, save your ERS, and then you can use that ERS to overtake them, and then you drag them along, let them save ERS, and you basically just keep swapping positions, because what that actually does is it allows you to catch up to the people ahead of you who are stuck within the DRS train, or potentially even battling for positions, because they're going to be losing a lot of time. So in those sort of situations you want to stick behind the car that's ahead of you. However, in other situations, for example, if you've just started the race, then obviously you're going to want to overtake as many cars as possible, or if it's the final couple of laps and you're in P2 or maybe P3, obviously you're going to want to make the overtakes then. But usually during the middle of the race you don't really want to be overtaking as many cars, especially if there's a car ahead of you that is slightly quicker than you, because then instead of wasting your own ERS, you can really just sit back, save a lot of fuel, save a lot of ERS, and then make the move when you feel necessary. Or maybe if you're doing an in-lap and you feel as if you want to be in front of the car ahead of you for track position, that's another good time to really think about overtaking, just to get ahead of them going into the pits. And it's a pretty similar situation when it comes to defending as well. Probably during the middle of the race you don't want to defend as hard as you probably would towards the start of the race when everyone's trying to overtake everyone, or towards the end of the race if you're maybe winning the race and obviously you're going to want to defend your position from the guy behind you. During the middle of the race, when things are sort of calmed down and you're sort of just waiting on sort of the pit strategies taking place, at that point you may not want to defend as heavily as you would in those other situations. Maybe you just let the car overtake you, and again, save fuel, save ERS by just following the car ahead of you. And not only is that allowing you to save all that fuel and all that ERS, but if they're quick, then it also helps you catch up to the people who are even ahead of him. The next thing you should focus on is knowing how many penalties the other drivers have, and also knowing what strategies they are using. Before the latest update, this was a little bit more difficult in terms of the strategies that they were using. You'd basically have to pass the car and see what tires they're on, and basically just make a calculated guess as to what strategy they're on based on what tires they're on a certain lap. And with penalties, you could obviously ask Jeff how many penalties someone have, but he wouldn't always tell you how many penalties they have, even if they do. However, with the latest update on F1 2020, you can now see on the leaderboard what tires somebody is on and also how many penalties they have as well. So make sure that whilst you're racing, you want to just periodically look at the leaderboard, see how many penalties the people around you have, and see what compound of tires they're also on as well, because that will give you a huge advantage and you can adapt your own strategy based on whatever strategy they're on or however many penalties they're on. Because for example, say if you have 3 seconds worth of tire penalties and the person behind you is 3 seconds ahead of you but they've got 6 seconds worth of penalties, then you don't really need to fight for the position too hard, because by the time the end of the race is going to happen, you're obviously going to take their position because you have less penalties than them and you're within that gap. So the next thing we're going to be covering is your fuel and ERS management. If you know how to manage your fuel and ERS correctly, it can give you a big advantage over the cars around you. So when it comes to your fuel, a general rule of thumb, a basic general rule of thumb is when you're going into slow speed corners, you're going to want to use lean. If you're on straights or potentially even high speed corners, you want to use rich. And there are situations where you'd use standard. For example, if you're running out of fuel towards the end of the race, instead of using rich, you'd use standard. Or if you're just going through some of those high high-speed corners as we mentioned before, it might be better just to use standard again to save that little bit of fuel that you would have been using that you can use a little bit later. And when it comes to your ERS, there's only two modes that you get during the race, and that is medium and overtake. You really want to be using overtake when you're either defending a position or you're overtaking for a position, and then the rest of the way you just use the standard medium. One suggestion I have for you guys, if you want to learn how to use your fuel and ERS a little bit better, is to watch content on YouTube. Watch league racing content on YouTube, whether it's from myself, whether it's from Opmir. You know, there's a ton of different creators out there who make league racing highlight videos. I suggest you watch those and really take a look as to how someone is using their fuel or using their ERS on certain tracks or in certain situations. That's what I did with Opmir, and I feel as if my ERS management is a little bit better than it was before I started watching some of his content. So whether you get it from me or you get it from another creator, watch somebody and really take in how they're using their fuel and their ERS management. Next, you need to really understand the weather situation. Usually I would recommend checking what the weather of the race is going to be like as you're going into qualifying, because that will give you an idea of what sort of setup you'll need to have for the race. But when it comes to the actual race, if it's dry conditions, if it's full dry conditions, then that's fair enough. If it's full wet conditions, that's also fair enough. However, if it is mixed conditions, you really need to understand what's going on and when it's going on, because if you want to transition into wet conditions or transition into dry conditions and gain a couple of positions, gain a big advantage, then you're definitely going to need to know when it's time to pit. I've made a video recently covering TRL Limitless in his race at Austria, so if you want to watch that, I basically cover how to transition into wet conditions or how to transition into dry conditions correctly so that you can really gain an advantage on other people if they make a mistake. So the next thing is track limits, which is a league racer's nightmare. When it comes to the F1 2020 game, track limits are inconsistent, and certain tracks you're just more likely to get penalties than other tracks. For example, Austria is a very penalty prone track. You're more likely to get a track limits penalty at that track. So if you learn how to drive on the limit of those track limits, it's really going to give you an advantage, because you're not going to be getting those warnings or getting those penalties, whereas the people around you will, and you can really gain positions on those type of tracks just by not getting any penalties. So lastly, we're going to be taking a look at some things that you need to focus on when it comes to the actual car itself, and the first thing we'll look at is engine temperatures. When it comes to your engine temperatures, you don't need to worry as much about it, because if you know how to manage your fuel, then your engine temperatures will most likely be fine as well. However, I do believe at around about 130 degrees Celsius, you start to lose a little bit of straight line speed when it comes to the power of your engine. So you really want to take a look at that periodically and see if your engine's maybe overheating. If it is, you can lose a little bit of straight line speed, so try to keep it below 130. After that is your tire temperatures, because when it comes to tire temperatures, it can cause a whole load of issues if you're not managing those as best as you can. For example, it can cause understeer if they're too cold, it can cause oversteer if they're too hot, and it's just a pain to really try and manage your tire temperatures, especially at tracks like Bahrain and Singapore. So for tracks with a lot of mid to high speed corners, you're going to want to focus more on the mediums or the hard compound of tires when it comes to those tracks, because the soft compound of tires, they generally overheat a lot quicker than the other compounds. For example, I believe the soft compound of tires overheat at around about 100 degrees, where you can take the medium tires to about 105 before they start to really overheat. So for tracks with those bending twist corners or those really high speed corners, you really want to consider going to the medium tires or going to the hard tires even, as they're going to be better race tires, especially at the start of the race when the car is carrying a lot of fuel. So make sure that you're periodically checking the tire temperatures. If you feel the car understeering or if you feel the car oversteering, it could actually be due to your tire temperatures and not the setup of the car. Something that is also tied in with tire temperatures is tire wear. The hotter your tires are, the quicker they're going to wear, so you really want to be taking a look at your tire temperatures during the race and your tire wear, because different compound of tires will wear at a certain rate, and the same compound of tires will even wear at a certain rate depending on the track. For example, at Austria you can take the soft tires to about 14 laps before they really start to die out, whereas at France you can only take them to around about lap 5 or lap 6. So I hope this video was very informative to you and you learned quite a bit from it, and if you did, then make sure to check the link in the description to go to the playlist of videos very similar to this so that you can continue to improve at the F1 2020 game. And if you liked the video, make sure to hit the like button and stick around by subscribing to the channel if you're new, and I'll see you guys in the next video.